When Evan Hale appeared at the door of a gas station in Bridgeport in August 2025, he was barely recognizable, barefoot, skeletal thin, with a beard reaching down to his chest and draped in tattered rags instead of clothes. The man had vanished 4 years earlier, along with his brother in one of the most remote and rugged areas of the Sierra Nevada, a place where everyone believed they had perished. But the most terrifying thing was not his emaciated appearance. The most terrifying thing was the markings he carried with him, what they revealed about those 4 years, about what had happened to Nathan, and about who, or what, still lurks alive in the shadows of the Bodie Hills. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On July 14, 2021, the Sierra Nevada greeted the morning with dry, clear air, a bright blue sky, and a gentle breeze flowing down from the high peaks along Rock Creek Valley. For brothers Nathan and Evan Hale, this 3-day trek was not just a short getaway, but also a rare chance to reunite after months of being busy with work and school. They had planned meticulously for 3 weeks, choosing the Rock Creek Trail leading up to Mono Pass, where glacial lakes and granite cliffs create one of the most striking landscapes in eastern California. That morning, after leaving their small lodge in Bishop, the brothers stopped at a roadside gas station to buy extra water and energy bars. Security footage shows them leaving the store at 8:42 a.m., fully fueled and driving toward the mountains. Upon reaching the Rock Creek Lake trailhead area, their gray Jeep was recorded by the parking lot camera at 9:12 a.m. 5 minutes later, images of the two brothers wearing backpacks, carrying a paper map, and Nathan's familiar trekking poles appear on frame as they step onto the trail leading into the forest. According to the itinerary they had shared with family, the two planned to cross Little Lakes Valley on the first day, camp on the eastern slope of Mono Pass, then continue into Upper Canyon the next morning. At approximately 11:03 a.m., Nathan's phone sent a short message to their mother. "We're getting close to the pass now. Signal is weak, but everything's fine." That was the last signal the family received. The afternoon passed in silence, no further updates, but since the mountains frequently lose signal, everyone still believed the brothers were continuing the trip as planned. Only when the lodge reported that the room reserved for 3 days remained empty, with no one returning to collect the key, did real concern begin to rise. Their mother called repeatedly, but both phones were out of coverage. At 9 p.m., eldest brother Michael Hale drove from Bishop up to Rock Creek to check. The brothers' Jeep was still parked quietly in the darkness, with no sign that the two had returned. Michael, along with lodge staff, searched around the parking area and trail entrance, but found nothing unusual. By 10:40 p.m., after hours of waiting, calling, and fruitless searching, the family officially reported the two missing to the Mono County Sheriff's Office. That very night, Mono County Search and Rescue was activated, dispatching a duty team of 8 personnel to Rock Creek Lake for initial assessment. Temperatures had dropped below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but thanks to moonlight and rescue lights, the trailhead area remained sufficiently illuminated to begin the search. The SRR team quickly established a starting point at the parking lot, determined the victim's expected direction of travel based on the route registered with the lodge, and split into 3 groups. 1 following the main trail, 1 checking side paths, and 1 working with K9 to track scent. Forest Service rangers were also called in to assist, providing detailed topographic maps and information about recent snowmelt levels in the upper Mono Pass area. Around 12:40, as the team advanced about half a mile from the trailhead, the K9 began reacting to a scent, matching the sample clothing provided by the family. Based on that signal, SR located a single footprint veering off the main trail, heading toward a brushy, boulder-strewn slope. The footprint size matched Nathan's or Evan's trekking shoes and was clear enough to show a slightly collapsed lower edge. Just a few meters away, flashlight beams revealed a small piece of green fabric snagged on a low branch. The color and material matched the lightweight jacket Evan commonly wore in the backcountry, as described by family in the missing persons report. The SR team marked both locations with reflective tape and logged the GPS coordinates into the tracking system. However, After only about another 30 meters, all signs stopped abruptly. No additional footprints, no long skid marks, no major cuts or disturbances on the ground, suggesting a violent impact or fall. The K9 continued checking the surrounding area, but the scent trail was cut off with no clear direction to follow. The search team expanded the perimeter to both sides of the trail, but found no other personal items, no gloves, hat, water bottle, or snack pouch. Flashlights only illuminated hard-packed ground, where mountain winds easily erased traces. A California Highway Patrol helicopter was deployed shortly afterward, sweeping searchlights along the entire Rock Creek route and Little Lakes Valley, but detected no human movement or significant heat signatures. Ground teams then checked hazardous terrain features around the area where signs disappeared, including the large eastern drop-off and narrow rock crevices leading down to the creek. However, there were no fresh slide marks, no equipment debris, no sounds or responses to callouts. After more than 4 hours of continuous sweeping, the SAR team recorded in the field report that they had found one footprint off-trail, one piece of fabric consistent with the victim's clothing, and a clear point where tracking could not continue. Initial assessment indicated the search radius needed to be expanded beyond the main trail, including side slopes and dense forest areas between Rock Creek and neighboring valleys. Given the complex terrain and warnings of possible weather changes within the next 24 hours, the SAR commander concluded that additional personnel and equipment would be required to launch a full-scale search the following morning. Moving into the second day of searching, SAR forces implemented an expanded fan-shaped search pattern radiating from the previously identified point of last signs. 3 ground teams, reinforced from Mono County and Inyo County, along with an additional K9 team, were assigned to thoroughly sweep the northeast side of Rock Creek, where the terrain features granite rock slopes interspersed with sparse pine forest, ideal for concealing evidence but complicating tracking. The SAR team leader instructed members to focus on analyzing the remaining physical evidence from the initial scene, particularly the depth and shape of the footprints recorded overnight. Upon reviewing photos and measurements, they noticed a marked change. The earliest footprints, about half a mile from the trailhead, showed depth and spacing consistent with normal strides of 2 people carrying roughly 30-pound backpacks. However, the 2 footprints near the point of disappearance showed something different. Shallower depth, blurred edges, and step length increased by approximately 3 to 5 inches compared to average adult stride. This suggested a sudden increase in speed or shift in weight distribution, possibly indicating haste, light running, or being dragged during the final few steps. When the analysis team moved to an area about 10 meters from the last footprint, they recorded a new unusual detail, a faint drag mark on soft soil running northeast, approximately 11 meters long, relatively straight, with no side-to-side oscillation. This was not a footprint, but a light drag impression, as if an object or person had been pulled along for a few seconds. SAR specialists confirmed that such movement was inconsistent with self-locomotion. Even running or tumbling would produce a series of impacts, twists, or uneven force distribution on the ground. Yet here the drag line was unnaturally straight, like a continuous mark created in a single motion. Continuing to sweep the surrounding area, the K9 team found no new scent, and there were no signs of prolonged struggle such as torn soil, broken branches, or scratch marks on rock surfaces. Examination around the eastern drop-off edge, a common accident site for trekkers, revealed no long skid marks or fall traces, no freshly disturbed soil or rock, and no fragments of gear appeared. The terrain analysis group emphasized that if the 2 victims had suffered an accident in this area, there would almost certainly be signs of sliding due to loose granitic sand on the surface or small rock rolls. Yet the entire area was unnaturally clean, showing virtually no evidence of any natural incident. After 4 hours of half-mile radius sweeping and data consolidation from collected traces, the SAR commander concluded that the brothers' movement sequence in the final minutes before losing contact was inconsistent with any previously documented trekking accident pattern in the Sierra Nevada. The abnormal change in travel speed, sudden disappearance of footprints, and the straight 11-meter-plus drag mark were three elements that could not be explained by normal hiking or backpack-weighted tumbling. The internal report stressed that achieving such a trace sequence required the action of an external force of undetermined nature, but one capable of completely disrupting the victim's natural movement behavior. In light of these anomalies, the SR team leader recommended reclassifying the case from missing due to accident to anomalous behavior requiring investigation, meaning deeper coordination with the Sheriff's Office investigative unit would be needed to determine whether the Hale brothers could have been interfered with by a human element directly on the Rock Creek Trail. When the preliminary field report from the SR team was forwarded to the Mono County Sheriff's Office, the investigative team began shifting to electronic data analysis to pinpoint the exact final moment the Hale brothers maintained digital contact. The first step was to submit an emergency request to the carriers to retrieve cell tower data for both devices. Nathan and Evan carried an iPhone belonging to Nathan and an Android belonging to Evan. The results showed Nathan's phone's last signal was logged at 11:27 a.m. on July 14, briefly connecting to a tower south of Rock Creek that provides very limited coverage in high valleys. Crucially, the log indicated the device was powered off by user command, not due to battery depletion or loss of signal. Similarly, Evan's phone recorded its final signal at 11:31 a.m., also showing a power-off command status, meaning both devices were turned off almost simultaneously within 4 minutes of each other. The fact that both brothers' devices were powered down nearly at the same time, while deep in the mountains with no realistic reason to do so, was deemed highly unusual and inconsistent with the brothers' prior backcountry behavior. After analyzing cell tower data, investigators turned to the built-in GPS in the smartwatch Evan typically wore on long hikes. Data extracted from Evan's synced account showed a regular sequence of position recordings from leaving the trailhead until approximately 11:24 a.m., just minutes before both phones were powered off. Even more notable was the final 42-second data segment, which displayed a perfectly straight-line movement with deviation of only a few centimeters. This could not occur if Evan were walking or running, as human motion always produces small oscillations, resulting in curved or slightly broken GPS paths. This straight movement sequence resembled an object being carried in a single direction by an external force or placed on a fixed moving surface. When cross-referencing the GPS signal stop time of 11:24 a.m. with cell tower logs of 11:27, 11:31 a.m., investigators found that the digital and physical traces on the ground matched near-perfectly. Footprints disappeared around 11:25 a.m., immediately followed by unnatural GPS movement data, and just minutes later, both phones were manually powered off. This ruled out a random accident, as in a typical mishap, devices would drop, break, lose signal abruptly, or continue transmitting until the battery died. The powering off of both devices within less than 5 minutes suggested a deliberate action carried out by someone present at that moment. Additionally, the Sheriff's Office digital forensics team confirmed there was no history of simultaneous device shutdowns by the brothers on previous trips, further reinforcing the anomalous nature. Combining all electronic data with the footprint and drag mark sequence documented by SAR in the field, investigators reached a preliminary conclusion that there was a strong possibility of third-party intervention on the Rock Creek Trail, resulting in the brothers being forced to leave their final known location and separated from their personal belongings. This was the first time the case was assessed as no longer falling within the scope of a routine trekking accident, but rather bearing characteristics of a deliberate disruptive event, compelling authorities to consider expanding the handling to include direct human interference. When the first electronic data showed multiple anomalous signs, the Mono County Sheriff's Office investigation team expanded the scope of review by re-examining all unsolved missing persons cases in the Sierra Nevada region over the past 3 decades. Among them, 2 cases stood out, one in 1998 and one in 2007, with several striking similarities to the disappearance of the Hale brothers. The 1998 case involved a 31-year-old man named Randall Cooper, who vanished while hiking alone near Bishop Pass. The SR team at the time found Randall's footprints approximately 40 meters off the trail, after which they abruptly disappeared without leaving any personal items, equipment, or signs of an accident. Randall's phone, an old flip phone, was also recorded as suddenly powering off at noon on the day he went missing, even though it had battery life prior to that. His body was never found. Nearly a decade later, in 2007, a couple aged 26 and 27 disappeared in the Pine Creek Canyon area, only about 15 air miles from Rock Creek. The search team worked for 12 days, but found no clear traces except for a torn piece of clothing caught on a rock and a few footprints more than 30 meters off the main trail, which also ended abruptly in the same manner as the 1998 case. The cell signals of both individuals were cut off almost simultaneously around noon on the day they vanished, and this coincidence was noted in the report, but deemed insufficient to form an investigative hypothesis. When compiling the three case files, 1998, 2007, and the Nathan and Evan case, the analysis team identified three matching elements: footprints deviating from the trail, but ending suddenly, electronic devices manually powered off within a short time window, and the absence of bodies or signs of a fall in any hazardous locations in all three instances. To verify the degree of connection, investigators input all location data from the three disappearances into a GIS topographic mapping system. The results displayed a triangular intersection area lying between Rock Creek, Pine Creek Canyon, and Bishop Pass, within a radius of approximately 12 to 20 miles. This is a rarely visited region, featuring numerous abandoned 19th century mine shafts and extremely complex terrain with steep rocky slopes, deep crevasses, and dense pine forests. Most of the area lacks cell service and has no cameras or major trails passing through. The map indicated that if there was a single influencing factor causing victims to leave the trail and be directed along a specific trajectory, this intersection zone was the most likely location for the event to have occurred. The investigators concluded that the recurrence of such a similar pattern in three disappearances, spaced nearly a decade apart, could not be considered pure coincidence. An internal report was compiled, highlighting the similarities in the clean loss of trace behavior and manual device shutdown, along with a map clearly marking the geographic intersection area among the three cases. Based on the severity and repetitive nature of the pattern, as well as the possibility that the Hale brothers' disappearance was part of a decades-long chain of phenomena, the lead investigator recommended reclassifying the file as an unusual recurring missing persons phenomenon and proposed inviting FBI assistance. Bringing in the FBI was deemed necessary because the agency possesses behavioral analysis systems, national long-term missing persons databases, and the capability to access in-depth records related to remote areas or potential unlawful confinement activities. This proposal, together with the intersection zone map, was forwarded to command level, marking a significant shift from a single missing persons case to a potential series of related events involving an unidentified actor operating in the Sierra Nevada for many years. In the first few weeks after completing the data analysis and cross-referencing the three similar disappearances, the investigation team continued gathering supplementary information, but as no new physical or electronic traces emerged, the case gradually moved into a waiting status. By the third month after Nathan and Evan went missing, the Mono County Sheriff's Office officially reclassified the case as inactive missing persons, commonly known as a cold case, meaning no active investigative efforts would continue without new leads. For the Hale family, this was an especially difficult period. They refused to stop searching and began organizing their own monthly trips into the Sierra Nevada. The eldest brother, Michael, led the group, bringing detailed maps and information shared by SAR. They recruited a few close friends of the brothers, along with volunteers who had assisted in other regional searches. The family printed hundreds of posters, regularly replacing those faded by sun and wind at the Rock Creek trailhead and nearby trekking areas. However, most tips from local residents turned out to be false leads. Some claimed to have seen two young men resembling Nathan and Evan in Bishop a few days after the disappearance, but security cameras recorded nothing. A group of hikers reported hearing screams near Pine Creek a few months earlier, but the timing did not match the brothers' disappearance date at all. Others even said they had encountered the brothers on the John Muir Trail, but the physical descriptions did not match, and there was no supporting evidence. Each false report forced the family to hope and then despair, making the long, grueling searches in harsh weather even more burdensome. Around the middle of the second year, during an extended search northward from Rock Creek, Michael and two friends discovered a strange symbol carved into the surface of a granite boulder. The symbol consisted of a large circle with two diagonal crosscuts inside. The carving was deeper than natural wind and sand scratches. Michael immediately reported it to the sheriff's office, hoping it might be a sign left by Nathan or Evan. However, the criminal analysis team, after inspection, concluded that they could not determine when the symbol had been carved, as the cuts showed slight weathering and could have existed for many years. There were no fresh rock chips around it for dating, nor any other personal items or human traces within a 200-meter radius. Due to the lack of direct linkage, the discovery was insufficient to reopen the official investigation. The family kept photos of the symbol and marked the location on their personal map, but authorities only noted it in a supplementary file for future reference. Throughout those 3 years, all case data from scene photos, satellite maps, cell tower analysis, GPS, SAR reports, to the files of the 1998 and 2007 disappearances were cataloged and stored in the Mono County Cold Case Archive. The agency still conducted 6-month reviews of new Sierra Nevada missing persons cases to check for matching patterns. But during that period, no event exhibited characteristics similar to the Hale brothers' case. Although the Hale family gradually grew accustomed to the prolonged silence, they continued returning to Rock Creek each month, following the exact route from the parking area to the point of last contact, and then veering toward the eastern slope, the path Asar had swept on the second search day. But nature erases traces quickly. Old footprints were leveled by rain and snow, marker bushes grew back tall. By the end of the third year, hope remained, but the frequency of searches gradually decreased due to harsh weather and the complete absence of new leads. Until nearly 4 full years later, when the case seemed to have fully sunk into cold case status, an unexpected event broke the silence. On the morning of August 2, 2025, in the town of Bridgeport, more than 30 miles north of Rock Creek, a gas station security camera recorded a gaunt young man with disheveled hair and beard, wearing tattered clothing, staggering from the direction of Highway 395 toward the store. The man was barefoot, his cracked feet covered in the characteristic gray dust of the Bodie Hills area. As he tried to open the glass door, the morning shift employee noticed his body trembling violently, almost uncontrollably. The man collapsed immediately after stepping inside, prompting those present to call 911 at once. When paramedics and Mono County Sheriff's deputies arrived just minutes later, the man was unable to answer any questions, only producing weak sounds, and reacted strongly when an officer accidentally slammed a metal door behind the counter with a loud bang. During medical assistance, a nurse discovered he was clutching a thick, filthy notebook with a peeling hard cover tied shut with thin rope. When a few pages were briefly opened, they saw strange symbols written repeatedly in dull pencil. Police immediately seized the notebook as evidence and cordoned off the entire gas station area under protocol for handling potential escaped captive individuals. After loading the man into the ambulance, an officer ran a quick identification check using fingerprints captured with a handheld device. The result, obtained in seconds, stunned everyone present. The fingerprints matched perfectly with the record of Evan Hale, who had been declared missing nearly 4 years earlier along with his brother Nathan. The news was immediately relayed to the Mono County Sheriff's Office, triggering an urgent mobilization of the entire investigative unit. Evan was transported to the local hospital in Bridgeport in critical condition, severe dehydration, hypothermia and extreme weight loss with visible ribs. When doctors tried to ask questions, Evan only shook his head or covered his ears with both hands whenever there was a loud noise. Notably, every time a metal object clanged nearby, he would convulse and try to retreat into the corner of the bed. Police maintained a guard outside the hospital room while attempting to shield Evan from triggering panic-inducing sounds. While Evan received medical care, the investigative team took possession of the notebook he carried and immediately forwarded it to the analysis division. The notebook contained hundreds of pages of repeated pencil symbols, some pages covered entirely in geometric patterns, others with just a few shaky marks as if written with a trembling hand. One officer remarked that it did not resemble a normal diary, but rather some kind of symbol system created during captivity. Investigators cordoned off the area where Evan appeared and established a 1-mile radius search around the gas station, collecting fresh footprints along the dirt road behind it. Suspecting Evan had just escaped from a nearby confinement location, they set up temporary checkpoints on Highway 395 and notified all patrol units within a 30-mile radius. Concurrently, the sheriff's office issued an order to reopen the Nathan and Evan Hale case file, upgrading its status from cold case to active investigation, urgent priority. A small task force was dispatched to Bridgeport to review surrounding cameras and reconstruct Evan's movements prior to entering the gas station. Analysis showed Evan first appeared at 6:12 a.m. on a deserted road segment east of town, coming from the direction of the vast desolate areas toward Bodie, a region with hundreds of abandoned 19th-century mine shafts. This matched the type of soil caked on his feet. Additionally, they discovered that just before entering the gas station, Evan had paused for a few seconds at the turn into town, looking around in a fearful, vigilant posture as if checking for someone. Evan's reappearance completely transformed the course of the case. Investigative forces immediately shifted from passive to emergency response, sweeping the entire possible travel area, checking for the existence of a secret confinement site within range, and establishing special protective measures for the victim pending full medical and psychological evaluation. Within just 2 hours of identity confirmation, the 4-year-old missing persons file was officially reactivated for the first time since 2021. The notebook of symbols Evan carried immediately became central evidence, and the fact that one of the 2 victims had reappeared alive, albeit in extreme physical decline, forced authorities to completely reassess all initial conclusions about this mysterious disappearance. Shortly afterward, once Evan was stabilized at Bridgeport Hospital, an interdisciplinary medical evaluation team was mobilized to conduct a comprehensive assessment to determine the extent of physical damage and reconstruct the timeline of captivity. A full physical exam revealed severe weight loss. Evan was essentially skin and bones, and signs of prolonged dehydration. For more precise analysis, doctors immediately moved him into advanced testing protocols. That same afternoon, X-rays were performed, revealing 2 previously fractured ribs that had healed at incorrect angles, injuries occurring at least 1-2 years earlier and never treated. An old fracture in the left foot bone was also clearly visible, fully malunited, confirming trauma under complete lack of medical care. An MRI followed to examine soft tissues, particularly muscles and ligaments. The images showed severe muscle atrophy in the lower limbs, most pronounced in the quadriceps and calf muscle groups, typical findings in individuals with long-term restricted mobility. The symmetrical atrophy in both legs indicated Evan had been unable to walk normally for many months, possibly years. Doctors used muscle density analysis charts combined with tissue fibrosis levels to estimate that Evan had suffered severe mobility restriction for at least 36 months, nearly 3 years. Blood tests were conducted concurrently. Results showed Evan's vitamin D level was near undetectable, a classic sign of extremely low sunlight exposure over a prolonged period. Based on serum 25-hydroxyvitamin D concentration, specialists determined Evan must have lived in an environment without natural light for at least 24 consecutive months. Severely reduced iron levels, low protein, and signs of chronic anemia indicated a nutritionally impoverished diet, likely consisting only of simple carbohydrates with virtually no fresh food. Elevated cellular oxidative stress markers in the blood also reflected prolonged emaciation. After completing bone and nutritional evaluations, doctors moved to skin surface analysis. Evan had numerous areas of abnormally thin skin, especially on the arms and back, where repeated friction against hard surfaces had occurred. Darkened patches on the wrists and ankles reflected rope-binding abrasion, while old calluses appeared at body positions frequently pressed against hard floors. This indicated he had been tied or restrained in place for extended periods at different times. Some wrist scars showed faint, deep outlines sufficient to confirm that bindings had been tightly cinched for long periods before being gradually loosened, leaving multiple scar layers corresponding to different phases of captivity. Based on scar age and tissue healing condition, the evaluation team estimated Evan had been bound during at least 4 prolonged phases, totaling 18 months. Old bruises of unusual shape appeared on the forearms and neck, inconsistent with normal accidents or natural impacts. Some had small arc shapes, possibly caused by impact with metal objects or rounded-edged solid structures. Notably, the skin around Evan's ankles showed continuous compression marks consistent with severely restricted movement in a confined space. Tissue specialists describe these as injuries commonly seen in victims held in small chambers or low-ceiling rooms. Another critical factor was the degree of bone density loss. Evan exhibited osteoporosis equivalent to that of a 70-year-old man, despite being only 28 years old. The medical panel concluded that such severe bone loss could only occur with prolonged lack of sunlight exposure and immobility, typically over 2 years or more. DEXA scan bone density measurement showed slight femoral height reduction due to degeneration, while abnormal calcification streaks along the spine indicated he had been forced to sit hunched or lie in restricted postures for extended periods. Synthesizing all data, bilateral lower limb muscle atrophy, profound bone density loss, multi-layered binding scars, extreme nutritional depletion, and near-zero vitamin D levels, the medical team unanimously concluded that Evan had not merely gone missing, but had been held captive for multiple consecutive years in light-deprived, severely mobility-restricted conditions without any medical care. The medical timeline reconstruction indicated mobility decline began approximately 3-6 months after the disappearance date, severe light deprivation lasted at least 2 years, and severe nutritional deficiency occurred consistently throughout the entire captivity period. The medical conclusions were immediately forwarded to the investigative team, confirming that Evan's injuries could not have resulted from surviving in the wild and could only stem from a prolonged, systematic, tightly controlled period of confinement. This raised the central question: who had held Evan captive, and what had happened to Nathan over the past 4 years? When the medical examination results showed that Evan had undergone a prolonged period of confinement, a team of clinical psychologists was brought in to conduct a comprehensive assessment of his mental state in order to determine the extent of psychological trauma and the potential for memory recovery. From the very first hours of contact, the specialists easily noticed that Evan exhibited a strong avoidance reflex to light. Whenever the hospital room window was open to let in natural light, Evan immediately turned his face away, raised his hand to shield his eyes, or hunched down low at the edge of the bed. A classic sign of someone who had lived too long in a low-light environment and had lost the ability to adjust reflexes to sudden changes in illumination. Similarly, any metallic origin sound, the rolling of a medical cart, the clanging of an instrument tray, or the closing of a metal door, triggered a full-body startle response, followed by Evan clutching his head with both hands or attempting to slide off the bed to distance himself from the sound. These reactions were not isolated reflexes, but occurred consistently, indicating they had been conditioned over a long period through repeated exposure in a confinement environment. In addition to sound reactions, the specialists also observed avoidance behavior toward closed doors and enclosed spaces. When hospital staff accidentally closed the room door to reduce outside noise, Evan immediately stood up, pressed his back against the wall opposite the door, breathing rapidly, eyes darting back and forth, as if searching for an escape. Even closing the door for just a few seconds caused him to lose composure, to the point that the door had to be reopened immediately to stabilize him. When taken to the narrow endoscopy room, Evan stopped at the threshold and refused to move forward, despite the doctor's attempts to explain. This reinforced the assessment that he had been confined in a small space with limited visibility and no freedom of movement. The psychologists used a time orientation test to evaluate Evan's ability to locate past versus present. He could not answer questions about what day, month, or even current season it was. When asked when he last remembered seeing sunlight, Evan gave no verbal reply, but only repeated the gesture of shielding his eyes, showing severe disruption in time-related memory. His memory map appeared almost fragmented into disconnected segments without sequence, typical of individuals subjected to long-term isolation. Another prominent sign was that Evan completely did not use spoken language to communicate, despite having no injury to the mouth or larynx area. When questioned, he would only write or draw symbols identical to those found in the notebook recovered on his person. Initially, the specialists thought this might be a personal notation system, but after multiple evaluation sessions, they realized Evan used these symbols as his primary means of communication, completely replacing spoken language. Every question was answered with a repeated set of symbols, indicating this behavior had been established over many years and was likely the result of coercion or control during confinement. The psychology team built a behavioral profile based on Evan's response patterns. Avoidance of light reflects prolonged, dark environment. Reaction to metallic sounds suggests presence of doors, locks, chains, or restraint devices. Avoidance of enclosed space are related to long-term isolation in small chambers. Loss of time awareness indicates lack of stable day-night cycle. Use of symbols instead of speech indicates prolonged restriction or prohibition of speaking. These manifestations were consistent with behavioral patterns commonly seen in victims held captive for many years under high psychological control. Notably, Evan showed no aggressive responses, only deep avoidance and fear, suggesting the captor maintained control by forcing compliance rather than provoking resistance. After synthesizing all data, the expert team concluded that Evan had not only suffered malnutrition and restricted movement as reported in the medical findings, but had also undergone a prolonged, systematic psychological control process carried out by someone capable of maintaining isolation, controlling sound, and controlling living space. This level of psychological trauma is typically only seen in cases of multi-year captivity where the victim is deprived of communication, access to light, and freedom of movement. The psychology team's final conclusion was sent to the investigative group, stating that Evan was a classic victim of prolonged captivity trauma, a form of injury that only occurs when an individual is held and controlled for many years, completely ruling out the possibility that he had simply gotten lost in the forest or survived alone. The specialist determined that what Evan experienced was the result of deliberate, organized, and sustained captivity, forcing investigators to consider the possibility of a perpetrator or a confinement system existing somewhere in the Sierra Nevada area. As soon as the notebook found on Evan's person was seized and transferred to the analysis room, the team of semioticians and behavioral analysts began the preliminary decoding phase, treating it as one of the key pieces of evidence for reconstructing the captivity process. The notebook contained 268 pages, mostly written in worn pencil, occasionally interspersed with darker strokes, but still in the same handwriting style, without borders or decoration. The team's first task was to classify all symbols into groups to identify patterns. They separated over 3,000 symbols into three main categories: circular or semicircular shapes, intersecting straight-line shapes, and complex composite symbols made of multiple strokes. After classification, the team realized that although the total number of symbols exceeded 60 different forms, only 27 symbols appeared repeatedly and continuously throughout the entire notebook. On many pages, these symbols repeated in nearly fixed cycles, one symbol appearing on page 15, would reappear on pages 42, 71, 99, and 127 in the same sequence. This repetition did not resemble random creative behavior, but rather resembled a forced system, as if the writer was required to record a sequence of symbols on command or to mark a fixed routine. One expert noted that the stability and regular cycling of the symbols were characteristic of controlled systems rather than spontaneous ones. When comparing the 27 core symbols, the team discovered an important detail: symbol number 11, consisting of a large circle with 2 diagonal crosscuts, matched almost exactly with the symbol carved into stone that the Hale family had discovered 2 years earlier during an independent search. Comparing shape, stroke thickness, and size proportions, the experts confirmed it was not a random similarity. The appearance of this symbol, both in the notebook and at a field location, suggested it could be related to the confinement space or some kind of marking system. To clarify further, the semiotics team began creating a preliminary cross-reference table between the symbols and their possible representation of behaviors or spaces. They noticed that certain symbols appeared more frequently on pages with heavily trembling strokes, presumed to be periods of high anxiety, while others only appeared on pages with neat and even handwriting. This led to the hypothesis that some symbols were related to times of being restrained, controlled, or in small spaces, while others might relate to periods of loosened supervision or movement to different areas. A behavioral analysis subgroup suggested that the box-shaped symbol with 3 parallel lines might represent a confinement chamber, as it appeared frequently on pages showing tense handwriting. Meanwhile, the horizontal arc symbol often appeared on pages with lighter strokes, possibly related to receiving food or temporary environmental changes. To test the hypotheses, the behavioral analysis team created a symbol behavior cross-reference table based on appearance patterns. Symbols repeating every 5-7 pages were usually related to routine cycles. Symbols appearing in clusters of 3-4 consecutive pages might relate to unusual events or prolonged coercion periods. Single symbols appearing alone at the end of a page often served as time markers or warning signals. During the review, the experts also searched known symbol systems, including Masonic codes, cultural symbols, ancient pictographic languages, prison codes, mining camp symbols, and survival group symbols. However, none matched. The notebook symbols did not belong to any previously recorded character set and showed no structure of a natural language such as ideographic language or single-syllable alphabet. A semiotics expert from UC Berkeley stated that the symbol set bore the characteristics of a human-created system developed in an isolated environment where spoken language was not used, yet the need to record or comply with a sequence of commands still existed. Some symbols had repeated angular strokes, as if copied from an existing template, unlike freehand writing. This increased the likelihood that Evan recorded these symbols under instruction, or that the symbols themselves served as a system for marking time, space, or events that the captor wanted to control. The investigative team also noticed that certain symbol clusters appeared in near-perfect succession every 30 pages, consistent with the hypothesis that they represented longer cycles, possibly monthly cycles or operational cycles, of some activity within the confinement environment. Although the exact meanings could not yet be determined, the behavioral analysis team concluded that the symbol set was highly systematic and most likely the product of a tightly controlled environment. Finally, Phase 1 report was compiled, confirming that the notebook contained no natural language, but rather a repeating symbol system following a specific method. The investigative team concluded that the 27 core symbols were the key to reconstructing the structure of the place where Evan was held, although their specific meanings had not been fully decoded, and especially the fact that one of the symbols matched the carving found on stone 2 years earlier showed that the notebook had a direct connection to the confinement environment, as well as the field area around the location where the 2 brothers disappeared. From this point onward, the notebook became the central document of the investigation, like a silent map containing information that Evan could not express in words. Once the preliminary symbol analysis was completed and the medical, psychological data had established the captivity context, the investigative team moved on to the most difficult task, collecting Evan's fragmented memory pieces while he remained in an extremely fragile psychological state. Since Evan could not use spoken language, every session was supported by a behavioral specialist and a large symbol chart for him to point to or recreate symbols corresponding to his memories. All memory recording sessions took place in a quiet room with soft lighting and the door always left open to avoid triggering panic responses. In the first session, Evan could only recall disjointed sensations without naming objects. Repeated metallic click sounds, prolonged darkness, heavy and uneven footsteps, sometimes muffled like worn rubber-soled shoes. When asked to describe the environment, Evan used the box-shaped symbol with 3 parallel lines, the same one the specialists temporarily interpreted as confined space and repeated it many times, clearly evoking the confinement chamber. When the specialist presented cards showing wall materials, Evan reacted most strongly to images of old wood surfaces and rough stone. He kept pointing to the rectangular symbol with 2 diagonal lines inside, then mimicked touching the wall with a look of discomfort, indicating that the confinement walls may have been non-uniform, one side wood, one side stone, or hard material. In the second session, when the specialist played a soft sound simulating a hanging light bulb swaying gently, Evan immediately covered his ears and pointed to the arc-shaped symbol that had appeared many times in the notebook. When asked how bright the light was, Evan squinted, then drew a symbol of 2 concentric circles with darker than usual strokes. The specialist interpreted that the type of light Evan described could be a low-wattage incandescent bulb with pale yellow color, common in makeshift spaces or underground chambers. By cross-referencing symbols and Evan's reactions, the investigative team recorded an important memory fragment. The confinement environment was not completely dark. It had artificial lighting, but weak and fluctuating with electrical vibration. When moving to sound analysis, Evan reacted most strongly to the soft chain rattling sound played at low volume. He immediately recoiled, placed his hands on his wrists as if mimicking being bound, then repeatedly wrote the hook-shaped symbol that appeared frequently on pages with trembling strokes. This reinforced the conclusion that chain sounds or metallic restraint noises were recurring elements in the confinement environment. In the third session, the specialists began attempting to piece sensations into time markers. When shown illustrations of a tunnel, Evan did not recoil in fear as he did with metallic door sounds. Instead, he stared intently and pointed to the circle-divided symbol, one of the 27 core symbols. He mimicked ducking his head to move through low space with his hands, implying he had once had to crawl through a narrow tunnel, possibly a connection between confinement chambers. Notably, when asked whether he had shared a room with Nathan, Evan immediately shook his head vigorously and wrote a single symbol, 2 parallel lines separated by a vertical line. This was the symbol the analysis team had previously speculated might represent separation or the existence of 2 distinct spaces. Though Evan did not speak, the reaction was clear enough to conclude that he and Nathan had been separated from the beginning or very early in the captivity process. In the fourth session, the investigative team attempted to reconstruct the spatial layout by presenting simple models simulating small chambers, corridors, wooden doors and metal doors. Evan reacted strongly to the wooden door model with a low click hinge sound, while only glancing fearfully at the metal door without pointing to any symbol. He redrew the rectangular symbol with diagonal lines inside, then mimicked touching the surface and pulling his hand back, indicating the wooden door was the main barrier in his confinement chamber. When observing the tunnel model, Evan wrote the large circle symbol with 2 intersecting lines, the one matching the field stone carving. But this time, the strokes were different, fast, strong, and decisive, showing deep familiarity with the symbol. This reinforced the hypothesis that the symbol represented a junction, tunnel entrance, or important transition area in the confinement system. At the end of the session, the The specialists compiled all the memory fragments Evan expressed through behavior, symbols, and reactions to create a preliminary diagram of the confinement space. The diagram included a small chamber with rough wood and stone walls, a gently swaying low-wattage incandescent bulb hanging in the center, a thick wooden door secured with a metal latch, a low tunnel leading to another area, and at least one additional separate confinement chamber, likely where Nathan was taken. All details in the diagram were cross-checked against the 27 core symbols in the notebook, showing a high degree of correspondence between symbols and memories. Though Evan could not yet recall verbally, these fragmented pieces provided the first picture of the place where he had been held and confirmed the pivotal role of the symbols in recording, or being forced to record, the core elements of that environment. When the investigation team had collected sufficient data from Evan's medical, psychological examinations, and memory recovery sessions, the next step was to analyze the samples on his body and clothing that he had with him when he appeared in Bridgeport to trace back the origin of the detention location. The soil samples adhered to the soles of his feet. Nail crevices and the hems of his pants were meticulously collected using sterile tools and transferred to the forensic geology lab in Sacramento for analysis. Visually, the soil was gray-brown in color, with a fine granular form mixed with rock powder, different from the bright granitic soil characteristic of Rock Creek. When examined under an optical microscope, the experts noticed that the soil sample contained many pyroxene grains and worn quartz crystals, along with traces of microscopic volcanic ash. This composition is not common in the Rock Creek Valley, but is more frequently found in areas with old mining activities and mixed geology. Deeper analysis using X-ray spectrometry revealed that the soil sample contained high levels of iron oxide, manganese, and ancient volcanic ash, suggesting an origin from silver and gold mining sites that once operated in northeastern Mono County. Particularly, the alkaline feldspar ratio in the sample matched the rock type characteristic of the Bodie Hills, estimated to be about 15 miles from Bridgeport. To confirm, the geology team cross-referenced the chemical composition of the soil sample with the Historical Geological Map database in the Sierra Nevada region. The results showed that most of the soil adhered to Evan's body did not belong to Rock Creek, but matched up to 87% with the soil type from Bodie Hills, an area that once had hundreds of underground mines and tunnels from the 19th century, many of which have been abandoned and are now completely unmonitored. This discovery immediately changed the direction of the investigation. If Evan appeared in Bridgeport with soil on his body matching Bodie Hills, and there were no elements indicating the presence of Rock Creek soil on his clothing, it was highly likely that he had been detained in a completely different area from where he disappeared 4 years earlier. When cross-referencing this data with the symbol notebook, the semiotics team realized that the characteristic symbol of a large divided circle, matching the symbol carved on the rock that the Hale family had previously discovered, had a shape similar to the notation symbols on some ancient mineral maps of Bodie Hills, often used to mark tunnel intersections or surface subsidence points. An archaeological mining expert was invited to further analyze and confirm that the structure Evan described through symbols and memories, a small chamber, old wooden door, low tunnel, weak yellow light, matched the space of a drift or adit mine dug horizontally into the hillside in the late 19th century. Particularly important was the wall material that Evan described, a combination of rough stone and timber supports matching the type of mine that was temporarily reinforced during Bodie's operational period. This strengthened the direct link between the soil sample and the symbol description. When the investigation team combined the data layers, a plausible model gradually emerged. Evan may have been detained in an old mine structure in Bodie Hills, completely far from Rock Creek, where he and Nathan disappeared. To narrow the scope, the forensic geology team also analyzed additional ash particles and microscopic minerals in the soil sample. A characteristic component, volcanic glass grains from ancient eruptions, identified as the type most prevalent around the eastern edge of Bodie Hills, allowed the suspected area to be narrowed to the region between Bodie Ghost Town and the East Walker River Trail. When cross-referenced with the map of previously mined areas, the suspected region narrowed even further, focusing on the strip of mines north of Bodie, where there are at least 17 tunnels that were not properly sealed after the mines closed. The investigators then compared the location where Evan appeared at 6:12 a.m. with possible walking routes from the nearest abandoned mines. The Bodie Hills terrain features tiered hillsides, many faint trails that are hard to recognize, but from some northeastern tunnels, the distance to Bridgeport is within 9-12 miles, completely feasible to cover in a few hours if Evan had run or walked in a panicked state. Additionally, the soil adhered to Evan's feet, had low moisture, and was loose, similar to the dry surface soil of Bodie Hills in summer, rather than the high-moisture granitic soil near Rock Creek Stream. This confirmed that Evan did not travel from Rock Creek down to Bridgeport, but from Bodie Hills or the adjacent area. After verifying the geological direction, the investigation team began combining this data with the 27 foundational symbols in the notebook. A comparison table was created. The divided circle symbol was cross-referenced with the symbol on old mine maps. The box-shaped symbol was compared to the detention chamber model. The tunnel-shaped symbol was overlaid onto the structures of the mines in northeastern Bodie. When put together, the symbol diagram in Evan's notebook formed a logical spatial structure, matching a multi-branched mine system, a main chamber, a secondary chamber, connecting tunnel, and a marking point that could be the main tunnel entrance. This led to the establishment of an initial geographic model. Evan was likely detained within a 3-mile radius around the group of mines north of Bodie Hills. To refine the scope, the geology team combined GPS data from Evan's phone before it turned off 4 years ago, with possible routes that a person could be transported. The simulation results showed that some secondary trails could lead vehicles or pedestrians from Rock Creek to Bodie Hills in a few hours via unmarked passes. Synthesizing 3 data layers, soil sample, symbol analysis, and geological map, the investigation team finally narrowed the suspected area to about 1.8 square miles, including 6 ancient mines with depths from 30 to 150 meters. This was the first time in 4 years that authorities identified a specific geographic area, likely to be where the 2 Hale brothers were taken, and also the narrowest scope determined since the disappearance occurred. When the suspected scope was narrowed to the group of mines north of Bodie Hills, the local investigation team coordinated with the FBI's technical team to plan a field approach focusing on a tunnel suspected of recent activity based on drone imagery and changes in soil color around the entrance. On the morning of August 12, 2025, the approach team entered the area in a safe formation, noting an old tunnel entrance that had been concealed with rotten wooden planks, stacked large rocks, and a thick layer of dust to create the impression that the tunnel had collapsed long ago. However, upon close observation, they noticed traces of wood edges cut with a modern saw blade and uneven disturbance in the surface dust layer, indicating that the covering materials had been moved not too long ago. After determining the external structural safety, the technical team used tools to lift the wooden planks and create enough space for 3 people to enter. Inside the tunnel entrance, the air was cold and a thick, musty, moldy smell rose up, characteristic of long-abandoned mines, but mixed with a faint decomposing organic odor. The soil layer near the door had many fresh scrape marks and displaced soil debris to the sides, clear signs that someone had passed through here recently. Advancing about 20 meters deeper, the investigation team reached a thick wooden door with homemade hinges, the exact type of door Evan had described in his memory sessions. This was not the original mine door, but an added one, secured with a bent metal bar. When opening the door, the forensic team entered the first chamber, the small detention cell that all of Evan's descriptions pointed to. The chamber measured 1.6 m x 1.9 m, with a low height of only about 1.8 m, a enough to make an adult slightly stoop. The walls were stacked wooden planks, wedged with soil and rock debris, showing clear old and new traces intermingled. Against the left wall was a U-shaped steel bar, fixed with large bolts into the rock face. Next to it were several worn synthetic fiber restraint ropes, darkened and twisted in a way, indicating they had been tightly bound for a long time. UV light inspection revealed many circular abrasion marks around the restraint rope positions from continuous rubbing, matching the injuries on Evan's wrists. The hard-packed dirt floor at the steel bar area matched the calloused degree on Evan's ankles, proving he had been fixed there for a long time. Near the room corner, the investigation team found a depression in the ground floor sized just enough for a thin mattress, though the scene only had remaining rotted fibers and stains from old liquids. Beside it was a rusted canned food container, with a faded label, but still identifiable as cheap canned food. On a small, crudely attached wooden shelf on the wall, they discovered a few homemade tools, 3 sharpened metal rods, a coiled wire segment, a piece of wood shaved into a handle, items that did not appear to be weapons, but could be used to repair the tunnel or create binding materials. In the right wall corner, light burn traces and accumulated soot indicated that at times the tunnel had used temporary light sources like candles or oil lamps, matching Evan's memory of weak yellow light. When proceeding to the second chamber through a narrow connecting passage between the 2 rooms, the investigation team found many signs that this space was completely isolated from the first chamber: no steel restraint bar, larger area, and fewer signs of habitation. However, the most important point in this chamber was an old notebook bound in rough cloth and placed under a wooden block against the wall. When opened, the investigators discovered it was densely filled with symbols identical to those in the notebook Evan carried when escaping. The same 27 foundational symbols and hundreds of small variations. The pages appeared to be written in a different handwriting, more even and stronger than Evan's, suggesting this notebook possibly belonged to the captor or was used as a template to force Evan to copy. A few pages had intersecting circle symbols drawn with strong force, indenting into the next 3 pages, matching the symbol previously recorded on the outdoor rock. Additionally, on the ground floor against the wall were shoe prints smaller than Evan's shoes, sized appropriately for an adult man. These prints were fresher than the rest of the floor and directed outward toward the tunnel door, proving that ingress and egress movements occurred around the time Evan appeared in Bridgeport. Continuing to record habitation traces, the investigation team found paper scraps, dry food packaging, steel wire bent into hanging hooks, and a rusted nail with a dented head, possibly once used to attach a lamp or hanging wire. The overall space completely matched the memory diagram Evan described. Small chamber, thick wooden door, low connecting tunnel between 2 areas, and the presence of the symbol system. When connecting the details from the scene with data from medical examinations, semiotics, and behavior, the investigation team reached a firm conclusion that this disguised mine tunnel was indeed where Evan had been detained for many years. There was no doubt left. This was the primary crime scene of the Hale brothers' disappearance case, and also the most significant breakthrough since the day they vanished. With the main detention chamber identified, the investigation team continued to expand the examination into the auxiliary tunnel branches to understand the entire structure. One of the deeper tunnel branches was partially blocked by weathered soil and rocks, appearing as if it had collapsed long ago but still had space behind. When the technical team carefully removed the blocking rocks, a stagnant airflow accompanied by a decomposing organic smell emanated, signaling the possibility of a biological object deep inside. The forensic team immediately conducted an inspection using a probe-mounted camera, inserting the device about 8 meters deep, when the lens captured an abnormal shape, a dark brown mass against the rock wall, sized equivalent to a curled human body. Upon direct approach, they discovered the partially decomposed body of a man, lying on his right side, legs curled, arms pressed to the body as if fixed in the narrow space. Based on the body size, limb bone length, and remaining clothing condition, the forensic team assessed that the body was highly likely that of Nathan Hale. The body was placed in a preservation bag and removed from the mine according to procedure, transported to the forensic lab in Mono County for precise examination. At the forensic lab, the bone and tissue inspection was conducted in 2 phases. First, the forensic team cleaned the skeleton and performed morphological evaluation. The skeleton showed many signs of prolonged stress. The lower limb bones were thinned, with low mineralization, proving the victim had endured long periods of immobility and malnutrition. More importantly, on the left and right wrists were deep grooves in the radius and ulna bones, due to repeated binding force over a long time. This was a sign similar to the wrist injuries on Evan's body, reinforcing the assessment that Nathan had also been fixed with restraints in a similar manner. On the ankle bones, there were also light, arc-shaped indentations corresponding to ankle restraints. These injuries were not accident consequences, but traces of long-term binding. Examination of the remaining soft tissues on the body showed signs of widespread infection, especially in the feet and chest, a bacterial pus reaction that had hardened. The soft tissues had decomposed but still retained enough structure to identify that cellulitis inflammation had appeared before the victim's death, possibly due to prolonged open wounds without care. This allowed forensics to determine that Nathan had suffered severe infection for many weeks, even months. In the chest cavity, ribs 5 and 6 had old malunion injuries, but not severe enough to cause death, showing Nathan had experienced prior trauma but lived a long time after being detained. To determine the time of death, the forensic team cross-referenced 3 factors: decomposition level, bone mineralization signs, and remaining tissue samples. The results showed Nathan died around the 2nd year after disappearance, that is, during the period when Evan was still detained in the first chamber. This matched Evan's reactions in memory sessions when he described being separated from Nathan very early and never seeing him again. Examining the cause of death, forensics found no cuts, slashes, penetrations, or acute fractures of the type that directly caused death. There were no sharp wounds or signs of heavy blows to the head or body. This ruled out the possibility that Nathan was killed with a weapon. However, the signs in the remaining soft tissues and bone analysis showed the victim's body suffered severe exhaustion, the subcutaneous fat layer nearly disappeared, brittle bone structure, severe anemia signs shown through bone marrow thinness. The remaining tissues in the abdominal cavity showed intestinal atrophy, a phenomenon occurring when the body endures prolonged starvation. Forensics concluded the cause of death was a combination of exhaustion, untreated infection, and severe prolonged malnutrition, ultimately leading to multiple organ failure. Particularly important was that there were no signs indicating Nathan received medical care or sufficient food in his final life stage. Beside the body, the investigation team also noted that the body's position matched the auxiliary tunnel structure that Evan indirectly described through the divided circle symbol and separation symbol. This tunnel branch was small, narrow, low, and completely without signs of long-term habitation, showing Nathan had been moved here when his health condition became serious or the captor no longer maintained efforts to keep him alive. The fact that the body showed no signs of post-mortem movement, no rolling or dragging marks, proved the victim died in place in the curled position, matching the narrow space conditions. After completing the examination, the forensic team confirmed there was no evidence whatsoever indicating Nathan resisted or had direct conflict with the captor at the time of death. This further strengthened the model of prolonged detention and neglect leading to death, rather than an immediate violent attack. The forensic conclusion was forwarded to the investigation team, marking that Nathan's body examination not only clarified the cause of death, but also affirmed the multi-layered detention structure in which Evan and Nathan were separated and experienced different conditions, leading to completely opposite outcomes. With all the data collected from the mine, forensic examination, semiotics, and the memory recording sessions of Evan, the federal and local investigative team moved into the behavioral profiling phase, a critical step aimed at identifying a perpetrator capable of maintaining a secret detention system for many years without being detected. First, The experts focused on the technique used to camouflage the mine entrance. The concealment method, using rotten wood, loose rocks, and a layer of dust, creating the illusion of a collapsed tunnel, is a common technique in abandoned mining areas, but the distinctive feature lies in the carefully selected materials, old pine wood, with a degree of rot closely matching mines abandoned since the 19th century, rocks chosen for their uneven sizes to create a natural surface, and dust swept back in the direction of the prevailing wind in the Bodie Hills area. This was not a technique an ordinary person could execute with such precision. It required deep knowledge of old mine terrain, the mining history of the region, and the ability to recreate a natural environment. Even the selection of the placement of the wooden beam as the load-bearing point for the fake collapse demonstrated that the camouflager possessed knowledge of traditional support structures in old drift mines. This led the profiling team to an initial conclusion. The perpetrator was very likely someone who had previously worked in the mining industry, or at the very least, had spent considerable time deliberately observing, studying, and using abandoned mines. Next, the team analyzed the restraints and improvised tools found in the cell. The restraints were made from cheap synthetic material, but tied using characteristic knots, commonly seen in manual labor, double stopper knots and non-slip cinch knots that miners or tunnel maintenance workers typically use to secure loads or fasten equipment. The wear on the rope showed it had been tightly cinched multiple times, and the twisting patterns around Evan's and Nathan's wrists proved the perpetrator not only tied them up, but also maintained a regular cycle of increasing and decreasing pressure, possibly to control behavior or prevent the victims from loosening the restraints through habit. In the corner of the cell, metal bars had been hand-sharpened using a manual method, with grinding marks following a slight spiral pattern consistent with classic grindstone sharpening techniques, the type of stone commonly found near old mines in Bodie Hills. Some tools had wooden handles made from pieces of old mine support timber, hand-carved with a knife or sharp tool. These elements led the profiling team to conclude that the perpetrator not only lived in a manual labor environment, but also possessed deep familiarity with mining materials and tunnel maintenance and repair mechanisms. These were not skills a random drifter could possess. They were skills accumulated through long-term practical exposure. Moving to the symbol system, the behavioral analysis team noted that the existence of two notebooks with identical symbol structures could not be coincidental. One belonged to Evan, with shaky, intermittent, unstable handwriting. The other was written with steady, strong, heavily pressured strokes, indicators of a person with a stable hand, not emaciated, and not under pressure. The symbol system consisted of 27 foundational symbols appearing in both notebooks, proving that the perpetrator not only forced Evan to record symbols, but may have himself created this symbol system as a method of psychological control. Forcing the victim to use symbols to describe behavior, space, and daily cycles is a form of coercive cognitive control behavior, similar to detention models where the perpetrator seeks to separate the victim from real language, making them dependent on the symbol system he established. This is a pattern of behavior commonly seen in perpetrators with extreme power needs, who enjoy total control over the victim's environment and actions, while also exhibiting high isolation and very little social interaction. Psychological data suggested the perpetrator tended to live alone, avoid communities, be hostile toward strangers, and likely view the mine area as his private territory that he did not want anyone to approach. Additionally, maintaining two separate chambers, isolating Evan and Nathan, showed the perpetrator's tendency to organize and categorize victims, not impulsive behavior. Maintaining low-level yellow lighting also reflected an intent to control the environment to cause the victims to lose their sense of time. When combining all the data, the profiling team constructed the perpetrator's behavioral model. Male, living alone, highly skilled in manual crafts, deeply familiar with the Bodie Hills mines, possessive of space, and capable of covert operations without leaving easily detectable traces. He also tended to be suspicious, hostile, or avoidant of social contact, most likely living near the mine area and staying away from crowded communities. In addition to behavioral analysis, investigators reviewed residential data around Bodie Hills and identified one standout name, Raymond Cutter, 62 years old. A reclusive resident living in a wooden cabin a few miles from Bodie Ghost Town. Cutter had worked in his youth on mine survey teams, later serving as a tunnel structure repairman for small mining companies in the region. He had a minor record of property trespassing violations and several altercations with passers-by, whom he believed were entering his land. Notably, Cutter was known for understanding the old mine system so well that he could redraw maps of individual tunnel sections from memory. Middle-aged, living in seclusion, no relatives, and the cabin where he resided fell squarely within the radius established by the forensic geology team. There was no evidence Cutter had left the area for many years, and the few locals who had occasional contact with him described him as taciturn, avoiding strangers, yet always tense when mentioning mountain intruders. When all factors mine skills, hostile personality, ability to operate alone, control behavior pattern, and residence location were placed on the analysis table, the profiling team concluded that Raymond Cutter was the only suspect who fully matched the profile of someone capable of holding the Hale brothers in prolonged captivity. After the profiling dossier identified Raymond Cutter as the most fitting suspect, the investigative team quickly obtained a search warrant for the wooden cabin where he resided in the northern hills of Bodie Hills. The cabin was completely isolated from main roads, hidden behind a cluster of low pines, with only one access path leading to the dirt yard in front. On the morning of August 18, 2025, federal investigators, in coordination with the Mono County Sheriff's Office, approached the cabin in a safe formation. The cabin was unlocked, the wooden door slightly ajar, with no sign of Cutter being present. Upon entry, the team immediately secured the space and began full video documentation of the structure. Inside the cabin was a strange mixture of old personal furnishings and crude technical equipment. On the main table in the center of the room lay a hand-drawn mine map in pencil and black ink, spread across multiple sheets of paper joined manually. The map noted the locations of at least 17 abandoned mines within a few miles radius around the cabin, 5 of which belonged to the suspect area previously delineated by the geology team. The tunnels on the map were marked with symbols identical to the 27 foundational symbols appearing in the notebook Evan carried, proving a direct connection between the symbol system and the target's geological knowledge. On the east wall of the cabin, a long steel hook held 3 sections of chain cut into various small links, some showing fresh grinding marks with still shiny sharp edges. This type of chain resembled those used in mines to secure doors or anchor heavy objects, and was similar to the restraint samples from Evan's cell. Upon close inspection, forensic teams found several fabric fibers clinging to the chain links, the same material as the jacket Evan was wearing on the day he disappeared, although the fibers were old and frayed. In the corner of the cabin, next to a small homemade forge, various forging tools were scattered: flathead hammers, forging tongs, partially ground steel bars, and bent metal segments. Some steel bars had rounded ends, matching the style of tools found in the detention cell used for modifying wooden structures. The forge still contained fresh soot, indicating Cutter had used it recently. When moving to the storage area at the back of the cabin, investigators discovered an old wooden crate covered with a dirty cloth. Inside were personal items belonging to Nathan Hale, a broken-faced wristwatch, a broken metal keychain, and a faded t-shirt with a pattern matching the family's description of the shirt Nathan wore on the Rock Creek trip. Although the fabric was deteriorated, trace DNA from the collar was quickly analyzed on-site and matched Nathan's DNA profile from missing persons records. This was the first direct evidence connecting Cutter to one of the 2 victims. Additionally, investigators found several unusual signs of activity: a partially burned battery box, 2 long electrical cords with splice sections, and a notepaper with strong handwriting containing many symbols similar to those in the second notebook found in the mine. This area may have been where Cutter designed, tested, or maintained the lighting system for the detention cell. Scratches on the cabin walls near the window and around the work table area were also sampled, as their depth and structure resembled the rock carvings the Hale family had discovered in the forest. UV light examination of the cabin surfaces revealed multiple contact points with fingerprints and metal dust. Forensic teams collected dust samples from 4 areas near the forge, on the mine map, under the table, and around the chain hook. Immediate handheld device analysis showed all dust samples contained mineral components matching Bodie Hills soil and the dust from Evan's cell. Notably, the dust sample from under the table contained ground quartz particles and microscopic volcanic ash identical to samples found on Evan's feet. This was irrefutable evidence that Cutter's cabin and the detention cell were directly linked. Furthermore, several other personal items of Cutter were documented: empty food cans of the same brand found in the mine, a logbook recording forge usage times, and a pair of worn-soled rubber boots, the same type as the footprints found in the second chamber of the mine. Examination of the boot soles showed adhering dust matching the cell floor dust, including traces of iron oxide and pyroxene minerals. After compiling all the physical evidence, the hand-drawn mine map with symbol system, chains matching the restraint mechanism in the mine, forging tools consistent with cell implements, Nathan's personal items found in the cabin, and fully matching dust and metal comparison samples, the investigative team reached a firm conclusion that Raymond Cutter's cabin was not only a residence, but also a secondary crime scene. Directly involved in preparing materials, storing victim belongings, and operating the support system for the underground detention cell. This cabin became the most important link connecting Cutter to the entire process of detaining the Hale brothers. After Raymond Cutter's cabin was identified as a secondary crime scene directly related to the prolonged detention of the Hale brothers, the investigative forces expanded the search for the suspect's whereabouts. Cutter was known for moving irregularly, often appearing in desolate areas around Bodie Ghost Town at dawn or near dusk, mainly to collect scrap metal, check tunnels he considered his property, or chase away tourists he regarded as intruders. Based on this pattern, the Tactical and Behavioral Analysis Team recommended deploying forces at Bodie Ghost Town, an area with many abandoned structures and long sightlines, where Cutter had been spotted multiple times by locals in the previous year. On the morning of August 21, 2025, a SWAT team, in coordination with the FBI and Mono County Sheriff's Office, established a containment perimeter around Bodie Ghost Town within a half-mile radius. A reconnaissance drone was launched from the east to monitor heat signatures and movement in the abandoned buildings. At approximately 7:12 a.m., the drone detected a tall, thin figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat moving between 2 rows of decayed wooden houses in the central town area. Gait analysis showed a slight lean to the left, matching the description provided by a local who had encountered Cutter the previous winter. As the SWAT team closed in from 2 directions, the suspect turned in response to the sound of crunching gravel, shielded his eyes with his hand, and backed toward a collapsed storage shed. This was the familiar hostile reflex recorded at the cabin. Cutter typically sought escape routes through old wooden structures. Seconds after Cutter slipped into the shed doorway, the SWAT team simultaneously moved in and blocked all exits before issuing a surrender command. Cutter did not resist, simply standing motionless in the dusty room, staring at the officers with a dazed, disconnected gaze. He was handcuffed and escorted out without incident. Immediately after the arrest, Cutter was transported to a secure holding facility in Bridgeport for DNA, fingerprint, hair, and oral swab collection per standard procedure. Forensic priority was given to fingerprint comparison with prints recovered from the cell and cabin. Preliminary results came in that same afternoon. Cutter's fingerprints fully matched prints found on the wooden door latch of the main detention cell, a location the Hale brothers could not have reached while bound. Moreover, on the inside of the mine door, used for external opening and closing, clear fingerprints matched 12 minutia points of Cutter. This was the strongest and most direct physical evidence linking Cutter to the crime scene. Expanding the comparison, forensic teams found 3 additional matching prints on a metal pipe segment recovered from the second tunnel, and 2 more on the hand-drawn mind map seized from the cabin. Thus, the forensic linkage between Cutter and both crime scenes, the detention mine and the cabin, was established at a near absolute level. While physical evidence was processed, investigators contacted Evan for identification verification. Since Evan could not speak, identification was conducted through 2 special sessions, one using sound, the other using gait. Experts set up a soundproof room with 10 small speakers, each playing different sounds recorded from the cabin and mine: wooden door sounds, chain rattles, footsteps, metal creaks. When Cutter's footsteps, recorded during his escort through the corridor, were played, Evan immediately flinched and pressed himself against the wall, exactly replicating his reactions during memory recall sessions when describing the approach of his captor. He repeatedly pointed to a symbol previously tentatively decoded as "person coming," showing no confusion with any other sound. In the second session, investigators set up a one-way screen and had Cutter walk past it as directed by the interrogator. Although unable to clearly see Cutter's face, Evan reacted immediately upon seeing the slightly left-leaning gait with a slight dragging of the feet, a habit Cutter developed from an old injury in his youth. Evan retreated, covered his ears, and repeated the divided circle symbol previously identified as representing the perpetrator's presence or control. The identification process reinforced that Evan not only recognized Cutter, but exhibited strong memory-linked reactions directly tied to his captivity period. Parallel to Evan's identification, investigators interrogated Cutter. However, Cutter was largely uncooperative. He gave disjointed answers, sometimes denying knowledge of the mine area, sometimes making irrelevant statements such as, "You're not allowed on my land." When questioned about the mines, he fell silent, only staring at the corner of the wall. Nevertheless, this silence had little impact on the investigation direction, as the physical evidence and behavioral identification were already overwhelmingly strong. The investigating agency immediately prepared the prosecution dossier against Cutter, compiling all evidence, fingerprints, DNA, victim belongings, mine map, forging tools, soil samples, metal samples, symbol system, and Evan's identification. The complete dossier was forwarded to the federal prosecutor's office, marking the preparation phase for prosecuting one of the most serious prolonged detention cases ever to occur in the Sierra Nevada region. The trial of Raymond Cutter took place in November 2025 at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of California, drawing special attention from the press and the Sierra Nevada community. In the opening statement, the prosecutor presented the entire chain of evidence chronologically to demonstrate that this was not a case of getting lost, an accident, or impulsive behavior, but a systematic, multi-year detention plan. The evidence chain began with 2021 SAR data: footprints deviating from the trail, unusual straight-line movement, manually disabled phone signals, indicating third-party intervention. The prosecution then moved to electronic evidence: Evan's watch GPS recording an unnatural movement segment just minutes before the last known signal, ruling out voluntary trail departure. Next came the symbol system: the notebook Evan carried during escape, the notebook found in the mine, and the mine map in Cutter's cabin all contained the same 27 foundational symbols. Decoding experts explained that these were not natural symbols or a real language, but a coercive control system created by the perpetrator, forcing the victim to copy them in cycles. This was followed by geological analysis. Soil samples from Evan's feet and clothing matched 87% with Bodie Hills, not Rock Creek, not the area where he disappeared, proving Evan had traveled from the detention mine to Bridgeport. Crime scene evidence continued to be presented: images of the camouflaged mine entrance, small-size cell with steel structure, restraints and wear marks matching injuries on Evan's and Nathan's bones, spoiled food, forging tools, footprints, clusters of yellow burning charcoal, consistent with Evan's memory descriptions, and the second notebook containing the same symbol system, proving the perpetrator's active presence in the mine. The prosecution then presented cabin evidence: the secondary crime scene, including the hand-drawn mine map, chains, homemade forge, metal grinding tools, soil samples matching the mine's mineral signature, and most importantly, Nathan's personal items found in the wooden crate. All these elements formed a unified chain of linkage. Cutter not only knew about the mine system, but maintained, used, and controlled the location where the brothers were held. When moving to post-mortem evidence, forensic experts detailed Nathan's injuries, old restraint marks impressed into wrist bones, widespread tissue infection, signs of prolonged starvation, severe osteoporosis, and conclusion of death due to exhaustion, infection, malnutrition in the second year. No signs of direct weapon attack, consistent with death during prolonged neglect in captivity. Next, the fingerprint laboratory announced its conclusion. Cutter's fingerprints fully matched prints recovered from the cell's wooden door, metal bar, mine map found in the cabin, and several items inside the mine. The prosecution concluded, not only did Cutter know about the mine, he was the one who entered, operated, controlled, and maintained the place of detention. Evan was not a verbal witness, but summoned experts presented the two identification sessions, recognition of Cutter's footsteps, and Evan's reaction to his gait. Both responses matched the severe panic reflexes Evan displayed only when connected to memories of the perpetrator. Subsequently, a psychologist presented analysis. Evan's loss of time perception, fear of light, fear of metal sounds, confined spaces, and exclusive communication via symbols were all direct consequences of prolonged captivity, trauma, and perfectly consistent with the underground detention environment examined by investigators. During the timeline reconstruction, the prosecution clearly described the Hale brothers were taken from Rock Creek in 2021, transferred via a side path to Bodie Hill, held in the first chamber in the mine. Nathan separated to a smaller tunnel branch. Several months later, Nathan died in the second year. Evan continued to be held until 2025 escaped and appeared in Bridgeport. When all evidence had been presented, Cutter remained silent, offering no rebuttal, simply bowing his head and staring at the courtroom floor. The defense attorney attempted to argue that there was no direct recording of the detention act, but the argument was immediately dismissed. Physical evidence, crime scene, fingerprints, victim belongings, DNA, and Evan's identification formed a legal network too tight to deny. After 8 days of trial and more than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously convicted on all 4 counts: kidnapping, first-degree murder, torture, false imprisonment. The judge pronounced, Raymond Cutter is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for each major count, sentences to run consecutively, with no possibility of reduction. With this verdict, the case of the Hale brothers officially closed in the eyes of the law, marking the end of one of the most cruel secret detention sequences ever to occur in the Sierra Nevada. After the trial and the life sentence without parole handed down to Raymond Cutter, the post-investigation phase shifted focus entirely to the recovery of Evan Hale and the long-term impact assessment of the case on the Sierra Nevada community and the local law enforcement system. Evan was transferred from Bridgeport to a specialized intensive treatment center in Sacramento, where psychiatrists, PTSD therapists, and cognitive rehabilitation specialists collaborated to develop a multi-year treatment protocol. Upon admission, Evan's condition was described as severe PTSD, accompanied by panic disorder, startle responses to auditory stimuli, loss of time awareness, severely restricted social behavior, and complete dependence on the sign system that Cutter had forced him to use during captivity. The initial therapy sessions noted that Evan had great difficulty sleeping and frequently experienced flashbacks that caused convulsions, requiring mild sedatives. Whenever a door closed or the incandescent bulb in the recovery room made a humming sound, Evan immediately exhibited avoidance reflexes, backing away toward the wall and covering his ears, reactions showing that these stimuli still directly triggered memories from his time imprisoned in the mine. To reduce symptoms, the treatment team created a minimalist environment, indirect lighting. Doors always left partially open, no metal objects that could cause echoes, and all staff trained to communicate using signs or picture boards. During the first 6 weeks of treatment, Evan could only communicate through signs or by rewriting familiar symbols. Nevertheless, progress began to emerge as he gradually distinguished which signs represented real memories and which were merely meaningless forced signs that Cutter had made him copy. This marked the first step in the removal of coerced signs process, a cognitive therapy technique designed to dismantle the psychological control system left behind by the perpetrator. From late December onward, Evan began attempting to vocalize single sounds again, though his voice was hoarse and halting, indicating that some degree of normal language communication might be partially recoverable. However, full recovery was still considered difficult, as Evan had lived for nearly 4 years without using normal language, and his brain had adapted to the coerced communication model. Experts predicted he would need at least 2 to 3 more years of therapy to achieve basic social communication and the ability to live independently. Parallel to Evan's treatment, the FBI's semiotics team continued in-depth analysis of the sign system in the 2 notebooks to determine whether any information remained undecoded. Of the 27 foundational signs, 10 had been assigned relatively clear meanings: cell chamber, wooden door, low tunnel, eating cycle, Cutter's appearance marker, transition area between chambers, and the branch tunnel where Nathan's body was found. However, the remaining 17 signs still could not be explained, and this led to a shocking discovery. Some signs bore no relation to Evan's or Nathan's places of confinement. They appeared in cycles that did not align with the reconstructed 4-year timeline of captivity. Instead, they followed a disappear, repeat, disappear pattern, resembling signs that recorded the presence of another subject at a different location. Frequency analysis revealed that at least 6 signs appeared in longer cycles, extending across pages where Evan's handwriting remained steady, proving they were not random signs written at Cutter's demand. A new hypothesis emerged: the unexplained signs might represent other confinement chambers or control points that Cutter had used before abducting Nathan and Evan. This implied the possibility that Cutter had prior victims, a conclusion that prompted the FBI to immediately open a second investigation file to examine unsolved missing persons cases in Mono County and surrounding areas over the past 3 decades. When cross-referencing cold case data from 1989 to 2018, the investigation team identified 4 disappearances in the Bodie Hills area, with similar circumstances: sudden loss of contact, no bodies recovered, electronic devices ceasing signals at the edge of Bodie, and 2 cases showing anomalous cell tower data near the same ridge where Cutter's confinement mine was discovered. Although it could not yet be confirmed that the victims of these cases had been taken into Cutter's mine system, the pattern of location sign system, timing of disappearance matched strongly enough that the FBI Sacramento field office opened a new investigation file coded as Bodie Pattern Investigation. Meanwhile, Evan was placed under absolute protection and did not participate directly in any meetings related to the new file in order to avoid additional psychological impact. The Sierra Nevada community was deeply shaken after the investigation results and trial were made public. Rock Creek, Mono County, and Bodie Hills, previously quiet and remote, suddenly became the center of national debate about the dangers of abandoned mines. Many local residents admitted they had previously regarded old mine entrances as harmless historical relics. But the existence of a secret confinement system within these very mines forced California authorities to issue a directive to inventory 1,300 abandoned mines throughout the Sierra Nevada range and to implement new warning signage at more than 60 trailheads. Within the search and rescue community, the case created a systemic change. From now on, every missing person case in the Bodie, Mono area must be cross-checked against existing mine maps and cell tower data to rule out the possibility of abduction. Many investigators acknowledged that the Cutter case left a profound lesson: not every disappearance in the wilderness originates from nature. Sometimes man-made terrain, including old mines and abandoned structures, is more dangerous than natural terrain. For the local community, the grief over losing Nathan and Evan's miraculous survival became symbols of both tragedy and resilience. The Hale family continued living in Mono County to stay close to Evan, participating in awareness programs about the dangers of abandoned mines and becoming a powerful voice advocating for changes in search and rescue procedures. The case concluded on the legal level, but the unresolved issues, the 17 remaining open signs, the possibility that Cutter had earlier victims, and Evan's long-term psychological aftermath, continue to raise questions for the Sierra Nevada investigative system. How many other secrets still lie hidden in the dark tunnels beneath the Bodie Hills that no one has ever suspected? The story of the Hale brothers, the Bodie Hills mines, 4 years of prolonged captivity, and Evan's journey out of the darkness is not only an exceptionally serious criminal case, but also an accurate reflection of the very real challenges that American society faces today. The gap between rural mountain communities and the law enforcement system, the hidden dangers of abandoned structures, and the lack of awareness about personal safety during outdoor activities. From the detail of 2 brothers disappearing just a few miles from Rock Creek to Evan being found in Bridgeport with a notebook full of coerced signs, the story forces us to confront the reality that even areas considered safe like the Sierra Nevada have legal blind spots and human threats, not only natural ones. Many Americans love trekking, camping, and road trips, a cherished part of the culture of freedom and adventure, but the Hale case shows that inadequate preparation and lack of information about man-made terrain features such as abandoned mines can lead to deadly risks. A crucial lesson drawn from the anomalous cell tower and GPS signal loss is this: when communication suddenly drops in a remote area, the possibility of third-party intervention should never be ruled out simply because it is rare. The case also reflects a larger issue in American society. Isolated individuals like Raymond Cutter can exist outside oversight for many years, carrying extreme ideologies and behaviors that neighbors, authorities, and mental health systems cannot reach. When Cutter created a sign system to control Evan, a form of coerced language, it reminds us of the importance of community education and psychological support to prevent isolated individuals from sliding into antisocial hostility. Ultimately, the deepest lesson comes from Evan himself. Despite 4 years living in darkness, stripped of speech, movement, and sunlight, he survived and is recovering step by step. That reminds us of the value of perseverance, of community and family support systems, and of never dismissing any unusual sign in everyday life. The Hale case is not just a crime story. It is a wake-up call to all of America about the responsibility to protect one another, support one another, and stay vigilant against dangers hidden beneath the surface of peace. Thank you for joining me on this haunting story of the Hale brothers. If you found this content helpful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next case files. See you in the next video, where we will continue exploring the truths buried deep beneath the surface of seemingly peaceful lands.